In the quiet hum of a hospital corridor, life has a way of pressing pause and fast-forwarding at the same time. People move with a purpose that isn't quite urgency, but isn't calm either. The kind of motion born from uncertainty, from waiting rooms filled with whispered prayers and long, heavy breaths. It was in a place like this, a place no one hopes to be, that their story unknowingly began. He had been coming to the same hospital for days, walking the same hallway, always arriving early in the morning before the sun had fully claimed the sky. His father's condition had become a part of the rhythm of his days. Updates from doctors, short visits, long silences, and the steady ache of helplessness settling into his chest. Across that same hallway, she moved with a quiet grace. Though her eyes carried a storm she tried her best to steady. Her father was in a nearby ward, and every step she took felt wrapped in hope and fear in equal measure. She wasn't looking for anything, not comfort, not conversation, certainly not connection. She just wanted her father to live. But fate doesn't ask permission. The first time he saw her, she was standing beside a vending machine that refused to cooperate. A cup dropped without filling, and she let out a sigh that was more tired than frustrated. Their eyes met only for a second before she looked away. But there was something about that moment. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just strangely known, as if something in him recognized something in her. The second time, they passed each other in the hall. Not a word exchanged, not a nod, but a glance that lingered just a heartbeat longer than it should have. Something unspoken hung between them, the kind of thing you can't name but you feel, deep and immediate. Over the next few days, it kept happening. A passing glance in the waiting room, a quiet moment in the hallway, a shared silence near the elevators. Neither of them knew the other's name, but their eyes learned each other's story long before words came into play. They were two strangers walking through the same storm, drawn to each other by an invisible thread. She had noticed him first, tall, composed, carrying his grief with a kind of strength that didn't need to be loud. He noticed her too, calm, gentle, but with a resilience that showed through even in her most fragile moments. Something about her steadied him. Something about him made her feel less alone. Still, neither made the first move. It was her sister, a sharp-eyed observer with a knack for reading emotions like open books, who finally cut through the tension. She had watched the glances, the quiet mutual awareness, the almost smiles that never fully formed, and one afternoon, while waiting for an update on their father, she nudged her sister forward, just enough to make her stumble into a conversation she didn't know how badly she needed. It began with something small, a polite comment about the long waiting times, a question about their fathers, a shared sigh at the exhaustion that clung to all of them. But the moment their voices met, something clicked, effortless, natural, not forced, not awkward, as if the conversation had been waiting for them patiently just outside the edges of their grief. He found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. She found herself breathing a little easier. And her sister watched with the quiet satisfaction of someone who already knew where all this was heading. The connection that had begun with simple glances deepened that day. They didn't know yet that life would soon change for both of them, that their father's battles were nearing their final chapters, or that their own story was just beginning to write its first lines. All they knew was that in the harsh light of a hospital hallway, something unexpectedly beautiful had begun to take shape. A flicker of warmth in a cold season, a reason to look up from their grief. A spark, soft but undeniable, and far stronger than either of them understood at the time. Her name was Emily. His was Marcus. Funny how something as simple as a name can change the weight of a moment. How it can turn a stranger into someone real, someone you suddenly find yourself wanting to understand. After days of silent glances and quiet passing, putting names to the faces felt like uncovering the first layer of a story neither of them had planned to tell. It happened during a late afternoon, when the sky outside the hospital windows had taken on that muted gold of a sun easing toward the horizon. Emily's sister, Sarah, the one with the sharper intuition and the louder courage, decided enough was enough. She'd watched her sister soften every time Marcus walked by, watched Marcus glance up every time Emily entered a room, watched the two dance around a connection like people afraid of stepping too close to something fragile. So Sarah, impatient and well-meaning, walked directly up to Marcus in the hallway, smiled like she owned the entire moment, and said, "I'm Sarah. This is my sister, Emily." Emily nearly choked on her breath. Marcus blinked, surprised, maybe a little amused, but he nodded, offered a small handshake, and said his name in that calm, steady tone that seemed carved from quiet strength. Marcus said, "It's, nice to finally meet you both." And it really was. From that moment, something shifted. The invisible line between them dissolved, making room for conversation that felt as natural as breathing. Emily was shy at first, choosing her words carefully, her voice low but warm. Marcus, though reserved, carried a gentle humor that surfaced in small ways, a quiet laugh, a soft comment, the hint of a smile that only lit up his eyes. Sarah, satisfied with her work, drifted off toward the vending machine, leaving the two to discover each other in their own time. They talked about the small things first, the hours spent waiting on doctors, the chaos of the hospital cafeteria, the exhaustion that settled into their bones every night. But woven through those simple exchanges was an understanding deeper than the words themselves. They didn't have to explain the fear that sat heavy on their chests. They could see it in each other's posture, in the way they held their shoulders, in the pauses between their sentences. Emily found herself noticing the details, the way Marcus rubbed his thumb across his palm when he was anxious, the way his voice softened when he mentioned his father. Marcus noticed her, too, how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, how her eyes glimmered with unshed tears she refused to let fall, how strength seemed to cling to her even in her most vulnerable moments. The spark between them didn't erupt like something wild. It grew like something steady, quiet, sure. Like two hearts recognizing each other without needing permission. Over the next few days, the bond deepened. They shared coffee in the waiting room when sleep became impossible. They walked the hallways together during long stretches of silence. Sometimes they talked about their fathers, the memories, the fears, the hope they were clinging to like a lifeline. Other times they didn't speak at all. Sometimes silence said everything. For Emily, Marcus became a place to breathe. For Marcus, Emily became a reminder that even in the middle of heartbreak, the world could still offer something gentle. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt something stronger than fear. A cautious kind of comfort, a sense of being understood, an unexpected warmth blooming through the cold weight of waiting. Neither of them called it love, not yet, but the spark was there, unmistakable, steady, growing. A spark that would soon face the kind of storm that alters everything it touches. And somehow, even then, it refused to die. The days that followed carried a heaviness neither of them could escape. Hospitals have a way of bending time, stretching minutes into burdens and shrinking hours into blurs. The waiting, the watching, the hoping, it all carved itself into their spirits. And through it all, Marcus and Emily found themselves moving closer, quietly, almost instinctively, as if leaning into the only person who understood the language of their fear. But the storm they'd both been bracing for finally arrived. Marcus received the news first. It came early in the morning, when the hallway lights were still dim and the world was barely awake. A doctor approached him with that slow, careful walk people use when carrying bad news. Marcus didn't need words to know what had happened. He saw it in the doctor's eyes, that soft sympathy that makes the world feel impossibly heavy. His father was gone. For a moment, Marcus didn't hear anything else. The words echoed in his chest, not as sound, but as a physical ache, sharp, crushing, final. He didn't cry. He didn't collapse. He simply stood there, as the ground beneath him shifted, as if he were losing not just a parent, but a part of himself he'd always depended on to stay upright. Emily saw him from down the hall. She recognized the posture before she recognized the expression, the way someone looks when the world has stopped without warning. Instinct guided her steps. Her voice was soft when she reached him, just his name spoken gently, but it broke whatever fragile hold he had on his composure. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't try to explain. He just lowered his head and let himself lean into her arms, the grief finally pushing through the walls he'd held up for days. Emily held him tightly, not to fix anything. She knew she couldn't, but to keep him from falling apart completely. Her warmth, her steadiness, the quiet strength she offered without hesitation, it anchored him. And for Marcus, that embrace became the first moment he allowed himself to truly grieve. 2 days later, Emily found herself standing in the same place he had been, facing a doctor walking toward her with a familiar look. The moment she saw it, she felt her breath freeze in her chest. Her father, too, had slipped away. Emily didn't cry right away. Shock has a way of numbing the heart before pain can reach it. She felt weightless, hollow, as though she had been removed from her own body and placed somewhere outside herself. Sarah tried to comfort her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, whispering soft words, but grief doesn't always respond to familiarity. It responds to understanding. And the person who understood was the one standing across the hallway, watching her with the same heartbreak she had watched on him days earlier. Marcus approached with the same steadiness she had once offered him. No words, no explanations. He simply reached for her hand, slow, gentle, certain. Emily didn't pull away. She leaned into him, letting the brace of his presence keep her upright. For two people who barely knew each other weeks before, they suddenly felt as though they had walked through fire together. Their grief didn't scare the other away. It called them closer, drawing a quiet bond between two wounded hearts trying to navigate identical pain. They spent hours together after that, sitting in the quiet corner of the waiting room, talking only when words found their way through the heaviness. Sometimes Emily cried, tears finally breaking free. Marcus stayed beside her, never letting go of her hand. Sometimes Marcus spoke about memories of his father, and Emily listened, her own grief mingling with his in a way that didn't overwhelm but somehow softened the sharpest edges. Their fathers were gone. The world felt different, smaller, hollowed out. But in the wreckage of that loss, something had taken root, something fragile but deeply real. They didn't speak of love, not yet, but grief has a way of revealing truth, and the truth was simple. They needed each other. They understood each other, and from the ashes of their heartbreak, something beautiful had begun its first breath.
Grief doesn't follow a schedule. It doesn't fade neatly or move politely out of the way. It lingers, showing up in quiet mornings, heavy nights, and unexpected moments when a memory cuts sharper than before. But healing, too, has its own rhythm. And in the weeks that followed, Marcus and Emily found themselves learning that rhythm together. The hospital days were behind them now, but their lives had been altered in ways they were still trying to understand. Funerals came and went, leaving behind echoes of conversations that would never be completed. The world expected them to return to their routines, to move on, to adjust, but neither of them knew what normal was supposed to look like anymore. So instead of pretending to be okay, they leaned on each other. It started with small things, checking in through late-night messages when sleep didn't come, sharing coffee on quiet mornings when the heaviness felt too much to face alone, taking walks that had no destination except simply forward. They talked about their fathers often, not in the painful way that made their voices break, but in the soft way that made their memories feel alive. Stories poured out slowly. Marcus's father teaching him how to fix things around the house. Emily's father humming old songs while cooking dinner. These memories didn't hurt as sharply when shared. They felt like lanterns lighting the path through the dark. Marcus found comfort in Emily's resilience. She carried her pain with a grace that made him want to be better. Not stronger, not braver, but present. She wasn't afraid to cry, but she wasn't afraid to laugh either. And when she laughed, something inside him eased. Emily, in turn, found peace in Marcus's quiet strength. He didn't try to solve her grief or rush her healing. He just stayed, steady, dependable, a place she could land when the world felt too heavy. He listened, really listened, with the kind of patience that made her feel safe in her vulnerability. Grief had brought them together, but something deeper was beginning to weave itself into the spaces between their losses. One late afternoon, they sat on a park bench watching the sun lower itself behind the trees. It was the kind of evening that was too beautiful for the sadness they carried, but somehow beauty and pain had started to coexist for them. Emily rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, and he didn't move, not even an inch. He simply allowed the moment to settle. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I feel guilty when I laugh, like I shouldn't be happy yet." He exhaled slowly, understanding every word. He said, "I felt that way too, but then I realized our dads spent their whole lives wanting us to be happy. I think they'd be glad we found something good in all this." Emily's eyes softened, filling not with tears, but with a warmth she wasn't expecting. She turned slightly to look at him, and for the first time since the hospital, she noticed how kind his face looked in the fading light. Strong, worn by grief, but kind. Marcus felt her gaze and met it. The air shifted between them. Not sudden, not overwhelming, just a quiet recognition of something growing stronger than either of them had intended. But he didn't kiss her. She didn't reach for him. Not yet. Healing was still happening, slowly, layer by layer. They were building something. Trust, friendship, a bond forged in the hardest moments of their lives, and rushing it would have felt wrong. Instead, Marcus simply took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. The gesture was gentle, but it meant everything. Emily leaned closer, their shoulders touching, their breaths syncing with the quiet rhythm of the evening. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem frightening. It didn't seem empty. It felt open, fragile, but hopeful. Two broken hearts weren't just learning to heal, they were learning to heal together. And somewhere deep inside both of them, a truth began to form. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the beginning of something real.
As months passed, reality pressed in, responsibilities returned, expectations resurfaced. People who had given them space for grief now wanted answers. How are you doing? Are you okay? Are you moving on? Emily went back to work, trying to navigate the awkward sympathy that lingered in every hallway. Marcus picked up extra hours,
throwing himself into routine, trying to regain a sense of control. And slowly, without either of them meaning to, a quiet distance began to grow. Not because the feelings had faded. If anything, they had grown stronger. But love born in the midst of heartbreak can be terrifying. It forces you to face fears you've avoided, emotions you've tried to outrun. For Emily, that fear came in waves. She began wondering if she was leaning too heavily on Marcus, wondering if her heart was ready, wondering if the connection they shared was real, or if it was just grief binding two lonely souls together. She didn't tell him any of this. She didn't want to burden him. For Marcus, the fear came differently. He worried about losing her, not suddenly, like he lost his father, but slowly, like drifting ships that no one notices until the distance is too wide. He had never been good with words, especially when it came to emotions. He felt deeply, but expressing it felt like walking barefoot over glass. And so, their biggest struggle wasn't conflict. It was silence. One evening, after a long day, they met at a quiet diner, one of those small, dimly lit places where the clinking of dishes is softer than the conversations around them. Emily looked tired, her eyes shadowed with thoughts she hadn't spoken. Marcus noticed instantly. He always did. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just thinking a lot." He tried to meet her where she was, but she kept drifting away, answering questions with short sentences, deflecting whenever the conversation got close to anything emotional. Marcus felt the shift like a pressure in his chest. The distance wasn't huge yet, but he felt it growing. Finally, after a long silence, he said quietly, "You know you can talk to me, right?" Her eyes softened, but she looked down at her hands. "I know, I don't want to make a mistake." "A mistake?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with concern. Emily swallowed, searching for the right words. "What if we're moving too fast? What if this is all because of what we went through? What if it's not real?" Marcus felt the sting of those words, not because she doubted the connection, but because he felt the same fears, the same questions. He wanted to tell her everything, that she made life bearable again, that she was the first light he saw after the darkest season of his life. But the words tangled inside him, heavy and stubborn. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Emily, grief didn't create what we have. It just made us see it sooner. What I feel for you," he paused, steadying himself, "is real. And it scares me too." Her breath caught, not because his words were dramatic or loud, but because they were honest in the quietest way possible. Still, fear doesn't disappear in a moment. It lingers, testing, questioning. Their conversation that night didn't solve everything. It didn't erase the doubts or chase away the worries, but it did something equally important. It cracked open the silence. It gave them a place to start. In the weeks that followed, they worked on bridging that distance, slowly, gently, with conversations that were uncomfortable but necessary. They didn't rush, they didn't force anything. They simply chose each other, again and again, even when fear whispered otherwise. Love was beginning to grow roots, not in the absence of storms, but in the middle of them. And without knowing it, Marcus and Emily were preparing for the moment when love would reveal itself fully, unmistakably, and forever.
Time has a way of settling things, softening sharp edges, revealing what was true all along, and showing what was worth holding on to. For Marcus and Emily, the months that followed weren't perfect, but they were intentional. Every conversation, every shared moment, every step forward was built on something stronger than the fear that once held them back. Summer slipped into fall. Leaves changed, life changed with them. And slowly, something beautiful happened. Their grief no longer defined them. It didn't disappear. Grief never truly does, but it no longer weighed on every breath, every thought, every moment. Instead, it stood quietly beside them, woven into who they were, shaping but not controlling their future. They had grown, not away from their fathers, but toward the people their fathers had raised them to be. One Saturday morning, Marcus invited Emily on a drive. No explanation, just, "I want to show you something." His tone was gentle but certain, the kind of tone that made Emily feel both curious and safe. They drove outside the city where the noise faded and the world seemed to open up. Eventually, Marcus pulled onto a small, scenic overlook, a quiet hill with a view of open sky and winding roads, the kind of place where the world feels bigger, softer, easier to breathe. Emily stepped out of the car and wrapped her arms around herself as she looked at the view. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Marcus didn't answer right away. He was standing a few feet behind her, watching her with an expression she didn't often get to see, full, unguarded, overflowing with something deeper than affection. When she turned toward him, he took a slow breath, gathering the truth he had been carrying for months. "Emily," he said, voice low, steady, certain, "I think I knew something the day I met you. I didn't have words for it then. I barely have them now. But you've changed my life. You made the hardest months I've ever lived feel survivable. And somehow, you made hope feel real again." Her eyes warmed, glimmering with emotion. He stepped closer, his voice thick with sincerity. "I'm not saying this because of grief, or loneliness, or timing. I'm saying it because I love you. I'm in love with you, and I want a future with you." For a moment, Emily didn't speak, not because she was unsure, but because her heart was full, too full for words to form quickly. She took his hands in hers, her voice soft but unwavering. "Marcus, I was so afraid this was temporary, that it was just two broken people leaning on each other. But that's not what this is. You're the one person who understands the part of me no one else sees. You're the peace I didn't know I needed." She paused, exhaling a breath that carried months of held emotion. "I love you too, more than I ever expected to after everything we went through." The confession didn't feel rushed or dramatic. It felt right, like something they had been heading toward from the moment their eyes first met in that hospital hallway. Marcus pulled her into his arms, and Emily melted into him, their hearts finding a rhythm that felt like home. The wind moved softly around them, the sky stretched open, and for the first time in a long time, they felt not the weight of what they had lost, but the fullness of what they had found. Their father's absence would always be part of their story, but so would this moment. So would this love, born from tragedy, tested by fear, strengthened by healing, and now standing firm in the light of a future they were ready to face together. As the sun began its descent, casting warm gold across the horizon, they held on to each other, not because they were afraid of falling apart, but because they had chosen to walk forward, side by side, through the pain, through the uncertainty, through the healing, and into a love that wasn't accidental or fragile, but enduring, steadfast, and beautifully, undeniably real.
Years had passed, but the memory of that hospital hallway never truly faded. Marcus and Emily often spoke of it, not with sadness, but with reverence. It was the place where life had pressed pause, where grief had carved deep lines in their hearts, and yet where love had quietly taken root. Every glance, every moment shared in those uncertain days had become the foundation of a bond that neither distance, nor time, nor circumstance could weaken. Life moved on, as it always does. They celebrated small victories, faced challenges together, and learned that the world was not always fair,
But love, when nurtured, could be steadfast. Their hearts, once broken, had found a rhythm in each other. And through the years, the memory of loss became a quiet reminder. Even in the hardest seasons, beauty could emerge. Marcus and Emily never forgot their fathers, carrying their lessons, their laughter, and even their silences into the life they built together. Their love was not born from perfection. It was born from endurance, understanding, and courage. It was a love that had been tested by fire and tempered into something lasting. And now, as they walk forward together, side by side, it is not just their story they cherish, but the reminder that every connection, every moment of vulnerability, holds the power to change a life. To you, watching this story unfold, cherish those around you. Reach out, speak your truth, and allow love to bloom even in the unlikeliest of places. Life is fleeting, and moments like these are the ones that matter most. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that touch the heart. Remember, love is always worth finding, nurturing, and holding on to.